Welcome back. This is lecture 2, module 3, lecture 2. In module 3, lecture 1, we have talked about differences of language depending on the context. There we discussed about style and register. Today we will talk about another kind of difference, another kind of variation in language based on the factors of power and solidarity and on the idea of politeness. These are connected topics, hence we are discussing them together. So, basically power and solidarity in language, how they are reflected, what are the different ways in which we any kind of language in the world that reflects them. Some of the theories that have discussed this, that have looked into this, and also the way politeness is structured into language. Again, how they are connected to power and how they are connected to solidarity and other things. So, these are similar things. Now, speech is often a signal of social identity, who you are talking to, what is the power equation between the speaker and the addressee and the hearer. Sometimes the hearer and addressee are not the same. So, some languages do make a distinction between these two as well. So, primarily speech reflects social relationship between the speaker and the hearer in terms of the power that they share, whether in terms of the relationship based on power and solidarity, who is more powerful in that equation and who is less powerful, what is the equation and so on. So, power is associated with non-reciprocal forms of address. When you talk about language, we are talking about the way languages are formed, the speech is formed. Primarily in the very outset, power will be signaled through a non-reciprocal form of address. So, a speaker addresses another by either by title or by the first name, depending on who you are talking to. So, if you are the speaker is at a higher social strata by whatever parameter, maybe age, maybe position, maybe money, it can be depending on the scenario, it can be different, any kind of parameter, but at a higher strata compared to the addressee, then the addressee will be called by first name, but if it is reversed, then they will be probably calling them by the last name. That is how it works, or in some cases even by their the designation. For example, often you will see journalists asking question to the presidents or the prime minister, whatever, they will address them as Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. President, rather than by their name. So, that is what power equation looks like in terms of address terms. Solidarity on the other hand is associated with reciprocal forms of address. So, both of the speakers will be addressing each other by their first name or sometimes by title, both of them. So, both are in the similar kind of status. So, both can be addressing each other. In academia, it is very common for professors to address each other as professors. So, Professor X and Professor Y will call one each other as Professor X and Professor Y. So, that is how it also works. So, solidarity as in when you are at a reciprocal level, power is when it is non-reciprocal, there is a hierarchy. So, power governs asymmetrical relationship when one is subordinate to other, solidarity primarily when they are equal in some way or the other. Now, this is something about social reality, this is something that we all know. How does this interact with language? Primarily, of course, it is a vast domain of research, lots of different parameters can be studied, but we will be restricting our discussion to few linguistic parameters. One of them is the pronoun system. This is almost universal. Every language almost every language has a particular way of incorporating the solidarity versus power equation in the pronominal system. This was famously called the TNV system. So, pronouns of power and solidarity by Brown and Gilman's 1960 work. There they talk about how different European languages encode social relationship rather than merely grammatical references. So, pronoun system, it encodes the social information, and they this is how they talk about it, the T form and the V form. T form is depending on whether you use the T form or the V form, you will be signaling. So, the languages signal either closeness, familiarity, intimacy or distance, formality, power equation and so on. So, T form is the they give the example of French and German. In the French, tu, vous distinction is very well known. So, tu is referred to when you are using it for close friends, similar to Indian languages where tu, tum, aap, three-way distinction is there. In French, that is a two-way distinction, tu versus vous. Vous is actually the plural marker, it is used for honorificity. So, even with a single person, one can use the vous form to show respect. Similarly, German also has this. So, T form is familiarity, V form is most for respect, formality and social distance. This is how they study. So, in French it is vous, in German it is another kind. So, many European languages do have this kind of distinction. So, this is a pronominal distinction depending on what you are trying to signal. So, even if the other person is at a higher level, but you know him in a different as a friend, you can still use tu. So, this is a very clear cut signaling of the social your social situation, your social position through language. Other kinds of linguistic expressions are also used. For example, address terms, sometimes you might use proper names as vocatives or role based names like dad or mom or whatever, and sometimes you also use your honorific pronoun like the one we just discussed. So, tu, tum, aap, it will be. So, the way you address another person, be it in using their name, be it using their the role, that is one way of signaling power and solidarity. Honorific affixes, this is a grammatical way of adding the information of respect. So, how you show respect in Japanese is well known for this, Indian languages also do. So, aap aiye versus tu a. So, tu a can be used for somebody who is younger to you, a close friend, but for somebody who is older to you in position, age or whatever, you will be using aap aiye. So, not only you are changing the pronoun, you are also changing the verb ending, that is honorific affix. So, similarly, aate hain, jate hain. So, the nasalization in Hindi shows the respect that you are giving. So, X aata hai versus X aate hain, this is where the honorificity comes in, right. So, that is another way of showing respect. Speaker expression also in some languages, most notably Persian is a language that has a very intricate system of the speaker's expression. So, when they are addressing somebody, they have a very nice, very elaborate lexicon there to refer to somebody, addressing somebody versus to him themselves. So, themselves for themselves, for the speaker himself or herself, the word like slave, the despised one, this kind of things will be used, the most polite and humble, and so on and so forth. So, they use an elaborate system of expressing power equation. Various languages use various kinds. So, these are some. Word structure similar to the Hindi example I just gave you, Italian and Japanese both use very particular kind of grammatical structure to show the relationship of power depending on who the addressee is. So, in case of Italian, these are examples from textbooks. So, speak to me, if you will be using parlami versus mi parli depending on who you are talking to a superior versus to somebody intimate. Similarly, Japanese also has a elaborate quite an elaborate system of showing respect through the grammatical structure, verb structure. General vocabulary terms also can be utilized, because every language has a range of vocabulary items to be utilized for different kinds of social scenario, based on who the speaker is, and A refers to speaker and addressee. So, who the speaker is and what is the power equation between them, you can use any of them, that is language specific, culture specific. Similarly, there are some styles, not exactly about language, this is about style. Interruption is one such very common, where you try to show power versus solidarity in a speech scenario. So, interruption is a sign of dominance, very common in many cultures including India. So, a frequent finding, this is from a study in 1983, that shows that men dominate women by interrupting them in conversation. This is very common in India also. In everything given same, it is very common to find men talking over women and interrupting them. This is a sign, this is a way of trying to impose, trying to show who the boss is. Silence versus volubility, the assumption that powerful people do the talking and powerless people are silent. So, that is the background within which the understanding of interruption works. So, there is this Harold Pinter's mountain language dramatizes this idea. So, what they show is they outlaw their language. The oppressors silence the mountain people. Mountain people, that is why mountain language, it is called a mountain language. They, by making them, by silencing them, they take the power away. So, again there are circumstances in which this is, in many cases this is actually found to be true. For example, another study in 1986 notes that numerous proverbs exist in many cultures that instruct women and children to be silent, because it is good for women to be silent, it is good for children to be silent. So, the idea that power will be valuable versus silence is less powerful, is for the less powerful. That is typically how it works. So, on the one hand you have conversational power and solidarity that can be expressed through various kinds of grammatical structure. On the one hand, power refers to distance and solidarity refers to closeness. This is how typically things are. However, it is not always the case, because sometimes it might not work that way. For example, it is said that sometimes it also may entail each other. For example, any show of solidarity necessarily entails power, because in that claiming similarity and closeness limits the freedom of the other person. If I am trying to be too friendly with somebody, what I am doing here is I am on the surface it is solidarity, but actually I am limiting the freedom of the other person. So, this is also another way of looking at the power and solidarity as a strategy in any given scenario. Easy example of course also is the case of small young boys. Power entails solidarity not only by opposition to another team, but by opposition to each other. Often they pick up fight with another person. The third boy wants to join into the other two boys, they will pick a fight with one of them and thereby join the other two. So, these are certain things that show that it is not always, aggression is not always about power, but it is about solidarity, very common in the boys gangs kinds. Similarly, there are culture specific, not just gender specific differences. Culture specific differences have also been talked about. Many cultures in the world see arguing as a pleasurable sign of intimacy. Many examples exist. For example, the East European men and women, working class men and women of East European Jewish background, they have friendly arguments as a means of being more sociable. So, they do argue with each other. Similarly, the Greek examples that show that the dinner time cultural style is that they will have kind of a faux argument with each other. So, while they are fighting with each other, at the same time they will use the terms of endearment for each other. So, basically here argument is used as a form of intimacy, as a form of bonding, social bonding within family members, within close friend group and so on. So, it is, though on the one hand it is it does show power and solidarity, but the culture specific ways sometimes show the opposite as well. Some examples from India, an important study in this domain is that of Balasubramaniam, who looked at the power and solidarity in language in case of rural India. Now, rural India as opposed to the urban India, the stratification in the society is very strict. Often the groups, the social groups, the hierarchies are completely fixed. There is no non-negotiable differences are there. So, these reflect and reproduces those social hierarchies, the language, particularly the hierarchies with respect to caste, age, gender and of course, institutional authority. All these things are fixed and of course, they interact with each other. So, gender and age, if you are a young woman, you will be doubly repressed in that scenario. So, the framework on which he bases his work, Subramaniam bases the work is on that of Brown and Gilman's idea about power and solidarity. The argument here is that linguistic interaction in rural India is shaped more by structural inequality rather than personal choice. So, while we have been discussing power and solidarity using language structure in a way that we decide it is a personal choice, we want to signal power or we want to signal solidarity, hence we use this. But the argument in this particular study is that it is in many cases like in rural India, it is not a matter of choice, it is because that is the structural inequality is there already. Language simply follows it or reflects it and maybe even strengthens it to some extent. So, power relations remain deeply embedded, particularly through all these hierarchies that we talked about. So, these choices are not merely markers of politeness, but function as obligatory signs of deference and submission. You have to, depending on which group you belong to, you must oblige by using the appropriate language for that particular group. So, it is not a matter of choice, it is already given. And this is how the discussion is taken forward with respect to age. So, that there is an intersection between different different kinds of groupings in terms of age, in terms of gender and also other kinds. The cumulative effect is that these patterns show that power in rural India is intersectional and cumulative rather than singular. It is not just one to one, it is not who you are and who you are talking to. It is also where you are placed within the larger scheme of things. That is the main finding of the study. He also highlights that apparent shifts towards solidarity, such as the use of inclusive address forms during political campaigns or community gatherings, are often temporary and symbolic. Sometimes these kind of things do occur. Solidarity, these are symbolic because of for the momentary, whatever kind of gain they were looking for, political gain or other kinds of gain, but these do not last. Once the specific context ends, speakers revert to the conventional hierarchical pattern. So, you can sum up in this segment by saying that language is not just a tool for communication, but also a means of expressing social relationships. Power and solidarity are not fixed categories. In some cultures they might be more simple, in some cultures there is a lot of intersection, lot of interchangeability across groups and so on. Solidarity is expressed through reciprocal and symmetrical language use that emphasizes equality and shared identity, that is how typically they work. However, this is not always the case. Now, we move on to politeness strategies, which is connected to the idea of power and solidarity. Here, we will explore how language shapes social relationship through politeness in different cultures and language. Now, what is polite in one culture may not be polite in another culture. So, this is what makes this particular domain very interesting. Majority of politeness studies, research in politeness studies are part of pragmatics. Pragmatics is one domain within linguistic analysis, language studies. So, this is central to pragmatic studies of communicative competence, even pragmatic competence also comes into play. So, context over words, pragmatics studies how meaning is created in context rather than encoded directly in words. That is semantics. What is meant by this word versus another word, that is semantics, but what it means in a given context is pragmatics. So, that is the larger background within which politeness has been often studied, and sociolinguistics shows the cultural variation within this domain. So, politeness varies across social groups, institutions and different languages and different countries. All of these parameters are interesting when it comes to politeness. Defining politeness, we can define them. Now, again this is a definition, may or may not work for all cultures. So, what describes defines polite behavior as socio-culturally. This is the most important variable. It is always socio-culturally determined behavior directed towards the goal of establishing or maintaining a state of equilibrium, not creating any disturbance, not no double rousing, just keep the equilibrium and remain within the given parameters and speak. That is what polite behavior is all about. Politeness strategies again, different ways in which language is modified and modulated so as to make it acceptable to the listener. You should not in any given speech scenario has a particular code, and we typically tend to observe those codes. When you do not, there are many various kinds of repercussions. You might be labeled as a rebel, or you might just be thrown out depending on who you are, but largely societies adhere to the politeness strategies within that particular those social parameters. So, that is what, so we want to be acceptable to the listeners or to the larger audience, that is what politeness strategy typically talks about. Linguistic politeness has occupied a central space in social study of language, primarily because it can be different depending on the culture, and also there is the relative whether it is in sociolinguistic or it is pragmatic, and what are the contributions of each of these different domains. All of these have been also discussed, but we will not go there. We will broadly touch over some of the important theoretical perspectives. David Crystal's view on politeness primarily talks about these. So, specific discourse markers. So, in the English context, the word please will be commonly utilized, suitable tones of voice, tolerable forms of address, all of these are markers of politeness in speech. Then Ellen's integration theory talks about pragmatics and sociolinguistics, those two different perspectives to be integrated, and thereby we can think of a politeness strategy or politeness theory of politeness. It is a phenomenon that is associated with the relationship between language and social reality. That is what it is, and we can approach it through sociolinguistics or through pragmatics, or we can actually integrate them. Whatever we do, most of the theories of politeness typically have a concept of face as one of the most important or central concept within this politeness. So, what is the concept of face? Face is the image, public image of a person. So, it is it was introduced by Goffman, and it was developed by Brown and Levinson in their theory. So, positive face and negative face, two kinds of face they talk about. Positive face is that our desire to be liked, to be approved of, to be accepted by others in social interactions. This is what is the positive face of a person. Negative face, on the other hand, it is the desire to be free, to be independent, we do not want anything to be imposed on us. So, you don't make me, for example, in today's world where you have all these Instagram and Facebook and things like this dominate young people's mind, sometimes somebody who is too much into this might impose another person on a friend, you have to like my post, why didn't you comment, why didn't you like my post. So, that is something that threatens the negative face. I want to be left alone. So that is negative face, the face that of a person, every person has two sides. So, negative face is the one that wants to be left alone, that does not want to be anything to be imposed on them. Based on these two, they have built up the idea of politeness theory. Some of these are all competent speakers are aware of this interaction that involves face management. Every culture, this is not something taught, this is something that you learn given a particular any kind of social scenario. You learn to save both the faces, both positive and negative face, and this is how various kinds of politeness strategies in culturally maybe culturally slightly specific, but largely the idea is universal. That is what they talk about. Different kinds of politeness. So, distance politeness, deference politeness and camaraderie politeness. Distance politeness is when utilizing symbolic fences to establish boundaries. Everybody has their own personal boundary. So, you maintain your politeness to keep that island intact. You do not want to impose yourself on another person. So, historically this is textbooks will tell you that European middle class and upper classes, they use this kind of a strategy to as some kind of a territory marker. Deference politeness on the other hand is focused on conflict avoidance, where you want to show respect to the other person, you want to avoid conflict. This is when you use this kind of use the politeness strategies. Often involves debasing one for one or for both the parties, preferred mainly in Asian societies, where you become excessively polite. That is why sometimes the communication between Asians and Europeans end up in a hilarious way, because what we consider politeness may not be polite for them. That is how I started this whole discussion. Camaraderie politeness on the other hand emphasizes that social connection and openness are primary signs of courtesy. So, it is the goal here is completely different. Camaraderie is the idea. Polite speech has been studied by many scholars. So, there are many interesting examples. This is one from Merop's discussion in New York. This involves the setting is Michigan and the friend is from New York. The way she orders coffee is not how Michigan people order coffee. So, it was considered to be impolite, whereas the person was being polite in a New York way. And similarly, there are these Japanese examples, how you talk to your teacher. There are every language, every culture has their own way of strategizing politeness using language, sometimes by lexical means, sometimes by grammatical means and other. So, many studies there are resultant theories that take into account two primary aspects of conversation. One is the speaker intention and planning, the other is the addressee needs and demands of larger social group. So, speaker centric versus addressee centric, these are the way you can think of theorizing of politeness. So, there are other scholars have talked about it in slightly different way, first order and second order. So, first order politeness refers to when politeness is understood and evaluated by the native speaker of a language, the everyday intuitive understanding as how I understand what is polite in my language, that is first order politeness. Second order politeness refers to the formal theoretical models developed by linguists to explain politeness across language. So, this is an academic framework within which politeness is understood. Many classical theories of politeness belong to the second type, second kind. These are the three main theories of politeness that we will talk about. So, this is the maxim based Lakoff's three types of politeness and Brown and Levinson phase based politeness. That is what we were just talking about. Brown and Levinson makes extensive use of the idea of concept of phase, and that is what we will discuss last. I will slightly more detail, starting with Leach's model of politeness principle. So, he proposed his politeness model in the 1980s, focusing primarily on how language is used to maintain social harmony. So, the idea is how language is used to, we talked about equilibrium a little while ago. So, how do we maintain equilibrium in a given social scenario? How do we not disturb the harmony? That was his point of departure. He talks about he places his politeness principle within the larger domain of pragmatics. That too, first he describes, he makes three branches within pragmatics: general, pragmalinguistics and socio-pragmatics, and within the general pragmatics he includes the politeness principle as one important criteria that helps social harmony by regulating the interaction, balancing cooperative principle with interpersonal relationship. Many of the politeness principle theories have talked about the conversational maxims of Grice, where he talks about the quantity, quality and the relation or being relevant and those things. So, those parameters are always kept in mind while we are discussing politeness strategies, because politeness strategies are part of the conversational setup. So, we need to talk about them. Similarly, the same idea has been proposed by Leach and the same also has been taken up by Robin Lakoff. Robin Lakoff's model of politeness, this was given in the 1970s. Her work was in the intersection of generative semantics, speech act theory and Grice's cooperative principle. Cooperative principle is primarily between the cooperation between the speaker and the hearer. So, she views politeness as part of pragmatic competence like the other scholars as well, governed by systematic conversation rules, and she in fact gives a set of rules as to how we balance between the rules of conversation and the rules of politeness. Rules of conversation, that is maxims of Grice, and the rules of politeness. So, rule 1, rule 2, rule 3, there are 3 rules on that side, there are 4 maxims on this side, and then how a speaker negotiates given the scenario, given the background, how they negotiate these principles is what Robin Lacoff's model is all about. So, politeness becomes part of pragmatic competence and it is not just mere etiquette. It decides who you are talking to, what is your current goal and what is the background and all of that thing. So, this framework shows how pragmatic competence integrates both cooperative and politeness principles that she has given. So, these are the rules that she gave. Rule 1, do not impose. Rule 2, give option. Rule 3, make addressee feel good, or that is be friendly. So, these are the politeness principles on the one hand. On the other hand, you have the rules or Grice maxims of Grice. So, maxim of quality, quantity, and then you have relevance, manner. So, quantity talks about be as informative as required, not more, not less. Quality talks about say only what you believe to be true. Relevance is be relevant. Manner is of course be don't be ambiguous, don't be obscure, and so on. So, how do people match these two? How do they negotiate these two sets of principles is what ultimately results in a conversation setup where politeness is one of the outcomes. So, this is a framework that Robin Lacoff gave. Now, we move on to Brown and Levinson's politeness theory. Brown and Levinson's politeness theory is based primarily on their concept of face. We just talked about positive and negative face. The entire idea is about how we save faces and how we avoid face threatening acts. That is primarily what he talks about. So, politeness is as a protection, a system of protecting and negotiating the face during an interaction, both the positive and the negative face. So, because you are talking about preserving the face, he also brings in the idea of face threatening acts, FTA. Their 1987 publication. So, requests, orders and suggestions typically threaten negative face. So, anything that you are asking the other person to do automatically because negative face, remember, we do not want anything to be imposed on us. So, if even a request which is actually a positive thing, it is not a bad thing, but that also is a face threatening act as far as this theory goes. Cultural variation also is available, is visible here as well, like any other on all the previous categories we talked about. So, this is a socially constructed variety. So, address forms in societies where interactions between strangers is more on the deferential side, it would be rude to ignore the social distance. It is not for example, in India, if you are meeting some new people for the first time, the social distance is it is already embedded in the scenario. So, you use language in the politeness scale will be higher. So, you try to save both the positive and the negative face, but in some other cultures it may not be so. People might be overly friendly, that is also possible. So, that is what we mean by cultural differences. So, address forms used by Japanese or other India or other Asian languages like India is a marker. In European context, Italians are considered more friendly, Germans are considered standoffish because of the way the language is used. Negative face saving, negative face politeness in Japan again, the sensei suffix for teachers, for professors they use the word sensei, the marker sensei. In Germany also this is utilized, for example, it is very common for a student to refer to the professor with all the titles. So, professor, doctor, miss, everything together. So, it is this is one example from a textbook example, Guten Tag, Frau, Professor, Doctor, Nasbaum. So, Frau, good day, Miss, professor, doctor, Nasbam. So, she might have two, one normal doctorate, another might be an honorary doctorate. Mentioning both is quite common. So, this is how we these are examples of negative face saving. In contrast, some societies might avoid using overly deferential address, while in some cultures it is mandatory, in some cultures you might avoid it completely. So, in doing so they adhere to positive face once more. As a result, more first names to address is common. Many English speaking countries have this particular way of. So, what they do is, even for a professor, the student might use the first name. It does not matter whether the student talking to professor or their age gap, nothing, they might use first name. This is in contrast to the negative face saving, because here they are working on the positive face saving. Because they are trying to be more friendly, they are trying to be more sociable, more on the solidarity scale rather than on the power equation. That is how cultures might differ. Brown and Levinson gives many other examples also. The very famous example of mouse. So, a friend meeting another friend after a long time, calling him mouse. This is a term, probably they had a term of endearment from their that is between them, and they talk about this, they talk like this. So, mouse, I have not seen you in years, you look terrific, what are you up to? The way that it is spoken, the way the person is addressed, all of these are part of the strategies that use positive politeness. Similarly, on the other hand, if you are being overtly polite, being various kinds of strategies like, excuse me Mr. Michaels, I am sorry, but could I just interrupt you for one moment, maybe you are asking for something, but before that all of these strategies are in place, so that you do not want to be seen as intruding. These are examples, but in some cases there are exceptions. When we say that this using too much of politeness actually is for people who are not too close, but when it comes to families, in certain cultures it is quite possible to use honorific terms. In India this is very common. So, families are, of course, by virtue of being a family, everybody is close to each other. So, there is a close bond, there is a close relationship. Even then we do use deferential terms for elder family members. That is non-negotiable. You cannot call your grandfather as your friend, that is not possible. So, even when it is close, there is a close bond, there is familiarity, you still use deferential forms. Politeness is still used. So, here it will, those theoretical ideas will not work. Another concept that is common within the broader this broader domain is the idea of social weight. Social weight is the kind of imposition that is implied. Now, it may not be an imposition in the strictest sense, but it can still be somewhere in the continuum. So, for example, a simple thing like asking for the time. What is the time now might appear like an imposition, but at a smaller level. Asking for money is more of a at a higher level of imposition. The higher the amount of money, the less number of people you can ask it to. So, that shows that it is an imposition of some kind. So, the magnitude of request directly affects the politeness strategies as which are appropriate and who can be approached. So, that is the idea of social weight. Face threatening acts as we talked about. So, we try to, in any kind of polite conversation, we try to save the face, both positive and the negative, by being polite. However, in some cases even something as simple as saying thank you might actually threaten the face. This can also be construed as a face threatening act. For example, saying thank you between family or friends, this will be hurting the positive face. When you are friends, when you are family, you do not say thank you. In India also it is very common to say दोस्तों के बीच में thank you sorry नहीं होता है. So, because that threatens your positive face. You do not want because politeness, being too polite here marks that you are not as close to me as I was expecting it to be. Interruption, of course, is an overt threat to the to negative face, because you want your autonomy is, somebody who is speaking, their autonomy is threatened. So, it is a clear case of face threatening, the negative face threatening. The researchers have also given some mathematical formula for calculating the face threat weight based on social distance, power relation, degree of imposition and so on and so forth. This comes from Brown and Levinson's idea. So, this is the broad framework within which they have through which you can understand. So, they give an example of a simple thing like asking how to get a pen from somebody. Now, depending on so many parameters, you can have you can use it and you can use the language in different ways. Very interesting representation that they have given. So, this demonstrates how speakers can choose from multiple strategies based on the social factor of power, distance and imposition. All of these are imbibed in this in this structure, and depending on what you have to take into account, you will use a different kind of structure. So, sometimes you may say nothing, but search in the bag, or sometimes you might say, oh, I forgot my pen, rather than asking directly, or you can simply say give me a pen, depending on all of these factors. So, how you negotiate those factors, that is and depending on that you will be using your language. In Indian languages, politeness has been studied by many scholars. Kumar's work is one of the more recent ones, where they talk about politeness strategies in Hindi. These studies actually show that Brown and Levinson's model does not really fit directly to many non-Western, non-European languages, because in our case the structure and the language structure and the social structure do not always the interaction is not always very simplistic. That is what we saw with Balasubramanian's work as well. Similar kind of findings they talk about this, Kumar also talks about. He gives a brief overview of politeness in Hindi, describing structures that lead to politeness at 3 different levels, linguistic levels. So, for example, lexical, syntactic and discourse, and there by shows that the polite structure, sometimes the structure might be polite at the structural level, lexical level, but it might be impolite due to the impolite structure at the pragmatic or discourse level. So, that is this interaction between the different kinds of levels of language that also plays out in Indian scenario. Various kinds of lexical politeness like honorific pronouns that we say up, for example, and then the kinship terms. He also discussed because of the Sanskritized vocabulary, the polite expressions of various kinds and other syntactic constructions as well. So, primarily this kind of structure, this kind of analysis basically shows goes to show as to how non-European, non-Western languages may have a slightly different way of constructing politeness in a given speech scenario. That is what primarily it does. More examples are added in the annexure for you to go through. We do not have time to discuss each of them, but I have added more in the annexure. So, you can check all of these, and this is how the study finds. So, discourse level, syntactic level, lexical level, and each of them do have some kind of an interaction between them. Negotiating politeness through discourse also has been discussed by him. So, context dependent politeness, surface agreement strategy, various things have been discussed. Mediating role of politeness, thus the shift from power based to solidarity based language patterns show how social relations evolve over time. So, this is also like we discussed in style. Today we know that this is also not a fixed thing. Not only there is a difference between European and non-European languages, but also in a given within the given social scenario, there might be some amount of fluidity that is allowed. So, we might move from from power equation to solidarity equation by for various reasons by changing the politeness strategies used in the language. So, politeness functions as a mediating mechanism between power and solidarity. It enables speakers to manage, face, negotiate social distance and ultimately maintain interactional harmony. So, this remains true, but the overall way we do it might be fluid and we adjust our politeness strategies depending on these factors. So, language ultimately becomes a social resource, not just a vehicle of information, not just a tool for communication, but it is a resource, primary resource for negotiating social relationship in everyday language. That is where politeness comes in, and that is why politeness is a very important construct within the larger domain of pragmatics and pragmatic competence. This is where we complete this lecture. Thank you.